thank you all for inviting us here today. I appreciate the opportunity. I look across and I saw a ton of friends and former colleagues, current colleagues, and a lot of people I respect in this room. So it's always a pleasure to be at the Rotary here in Baton Rouge. As we mentioned, we're talking about Safe BR. It's a coalition that we collectively have created and look forward to trying to address the public safety issues in East Baton Rouge Parish. I've got some notes. I'm not a great public speaker, as you guys probably know that know me one-on-one. You'll catch me and I'll sit there and bend your ear for an hour. But I do have a handful of notes, so if you could bear with me, I'll go through them. On our first slide, I'd just like to talk about who we are and what we do. And who we are is basically we're a newly formed coalition on the first slide. I'm sorry, let's talk about this, see? First slide. First slide is basically we're earlier this year, we as community members, business leaders, government officials, and everyday citizens came together to do something about unacceptably high crime rate in East Baton Rouge Parish. Safe BR was created to support our law enforcement and those folks in the community that are working to make our city parish a safer place to live. The effort is informed by data, it's built with partners, and it's focused on evidence-based solutions that can help us. So one of our main goal is you'll see later, there's some startling statistics, but it's to cut the murder rate by half in the next decade. It might sound easy, but it's not. If it was, a lot of people would be doing this, obviously. So that's our goal, and that's what we're here to kind of talk about. Evidence-based prevention and intervention programs with accountability and transparency using the data that we have. That's complex, and it takes a lot of us to do that. Who is Safe BR? So we are a newly formed coalition. It's about 300 individuals and organizations, companies. We're focused on making Baton Rouge safer for all our residents, North Baton Rouge, South Baton Rouge, black, white, Republican, Democrat. We're going to do this through some data-informed initiatives. We're going to look around the country and find what the best practices are that for cities and communities that have had the plague with crime and what's worked over there, and bring that back home and see how we can tailor that. As we all know, Baton Rouge can be unique in its own culture. We are committed to fostering a unified effort for these challenges head on. So first off, let's talk about the problem. We've seen widespread violent crime and homicides with massive cost to East Baton Rouge Parish that continue to grow. It's certainly not sustainable, and we as citizens are carrying the burden. Our law enforcement face unique challenges, and they can't do it alone, as Chris mentioned. It takes all of us working together on a solution that we know will move results. We know that gun violence is concentrated in specific low-opportunity areas among teenage boys and men in their 20s. That, first off, must be addressed. In a couple of weeks, the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, with Chris's leadership, is releasing analysis in partnership with Safe BR to highlight some of the root causes of violence in our crime. Some of this you've seen before, but combining this together with a holistic picture will help us drive those evidence-based solutions that we've talked about. For far too long, we've been siloed in our actions. Government does one thing, the judges do one thing, the DA does one thing. We're looking at concentrating on all of these issues together, and then with BRAF's help at a community-wide lens, we'll have a better vision of what's going to move our needle and how we go and move that, and what actions need to be taken to do that. This slide is remarkable. If you look, we know that not North Baton Rouge only is a symptom of violent gun crime in our community. There's no question about it. Here are incidents from 2019 to 2022. Every small triangle depicts a gun violence. Every small one. And if you look, there's not more than 1.5 miles away from another gun violence. There's a small sector along Highland Road with 1 or 2 neighborhoods that have been, you know, have not had that action happen yet, but it may be coming. And as you can see, 1.5 miles, wherever you live in this city, you've had some sort of gun violence happen. The next slide, it's $1.3 billion is what it's cost. Over the last 4 years, we've looked at the numbers, and we've seen 388 homicides. 388 homicides in the last 4 years. And that's cost us $1.3 billion. Now, yes, you can say some of that $300 million is from state and from government. Some of it's from our medical insurers or hospitals. Some of its impact on economics and not having jobs come here or losing jobs to other cities. But that's a real number, and if you want to just round it down and we made an error, it's still $1 billion that has plagued our community. And more importantly, personally, as someone who's had a father pass away from violent crime, 388 families have lost someone that they love. A father or a mother have lost somebody in our community, and we haven't done anything about it. We talk about it, but we haven't done anything. The next line is another startling result. Large cities in the U.S. tend to have around 10, a little bit more than 10 homicides per 100,000 people. That's that second to last line on the bottom. It's a 10, 15, 12, every 100,000 people. There's only a handful of cities that have more than 30. None of them are thriving cities, in my opinion. Baltimore, Detroit, New Orleans, and St. Louis. All of those 4 cities have lost population over the last decade, more than 10%. So knowing that those 4 cities are above that 30% mark, which is that dotted line, the second to bottom line is the large cities, and that's what the average is. This squiggly line is where Baton Rouge is. That squiggly line talks about where Baton Rouge is. And as you can see, we're dangerously close. And in many instances, in many years, we're above where we should be. This is where we say we need to cut homicides down by 50%. We need to be below 30 homicides per 100. Ideally, around the national average, around 10 to 15. We wanted to show this data, and this is going to be included with a lot more of the analysis that the Baton Rouge Area Foundation is putting together. But this crime alone, every father and every mother, every brother, sister, colleague, friend, neighbor, you look at that and it can be a statistic, easily. One more time, Kenny, I'm sorry. Those spikes is another instance that I just want to highlight. We've seen Katrina, and that's when we've had a spike. We had some good things happening, but after Katrina, we had an influx of population. We saw a spike in crime. After the 2016 flood, we had a spike in crime. After COVID, we've seen that spike in crime. Obviously, we're not doing what we need to do if a disaster takes us out of balance. The next slide is sort of our solutions. Do we have a silver bullet yet today? No. But we want to talk about data. We all have to come together, raise the resources, the money, the time, the sweat, the conversation that we haven't been having for our community safety. We should be focused on data-driven strategies, not what a Republican, a black, a white, a Democrat, North Baton Rouge or South Baton Rouge talks about or cares about. We need to look at the data and figure out what's going to move that needle. We must have an immediate impact to help stop violent crime now and get those people the help they need. We also must focus on some long-term investments and address the root cause of violent crime. This will help us figure out that 10-year goal that we talk about. I don't know anyone in this community, or quite frankly, anyone in my life, that doesn't believe violent crime will bring people together and to fight. It's a worthy cause. It's a worthy cause. And so, with my colleague and my friends, Clay Young, Adam Knapp, Chris Meyer, and the 300 or so others that have signed up as partners, we want to go in and address that. We want to have those hard conversations. We've seen our city just this year win 2 national championships because we brought resources together, because we had hard conversations, because we invested in what we knew was going to bring home that championship. In my mind, this is the championship. This is the prize. With that, we'll stop that population loss. We'll have businesses come here. We'll have people having jobs. They'll be spending money. We can invest that money in transportation, in roads, in our education system. We'll have smarter people in East Baton Rouge Parish that do not cause crime. Again, I'll say it again. We've won. I'm the biggest LSU fan here, I think. We've won 2 national championships, and we have not done anything on this. I do want to commend those folks that have Hiller, Congressman Graves, the mayor, the police chief, Sid, the law enforcement, those people on the front lines every day, every single day, for $40,000 or $50,000, willing to take a bullet for us. Yet we haven't gone in and talked about what the root cause is, and why are these kids, those teenagers and young men in their 20s, committing these crimes. The next slide, please. So, over the last couple of months, since we announced Safe BR, we have had some successes. We've talked about the sobering reality. Let's talk about some of the good stuff. We've secured about $8 million in public and private funds, state funds with the help of Governor Edwards, federal funds from the help of Congressman Graves, bills that will be passed by legislators at the Capitol in our delegation. I see Senator Foyle was a good champion of ours at the Capitol this past session. We've seen Senator Cassidy author bills in Congress. We've seen businesses open up their wallets and ask, how can we go in and put resources to where it needs to be put? We've funded over 75 of the 200 needed high-precision security cameras in partnership with the Page Rice Initiative. The Page Rice Initiative. Clay's going to sit here and talk more about that, but just let that sink in, of what we're doing here. 2 families that have lost somebody. 75 of 200 cameras. They're state-of-the-art cameras that are connected directly in a BRPD and a sheriff's crime centers. These have had invaluable these are an invaluable tool to help solve crime. We've made headlines a couple months ago about this gentleman in downtown and where he went. These crime cameras help solve that case. Technology is one of those many issues that we can go in and try to help fund. My friend Clay here, he's along with the Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Foundation, they've traveled the country. They've tried to find what works in other cities. And again, just one initiative. They've gone in and looked at the Inspiration Center. And just now I think about a month ago, we broke ground on that. It's going to be the new house of the Boys and Girls Club. It's going to be out in North Baton Rouge at Howell Park, where if you look at that map, the majority of gun violence is happening. We don't want it to be a mile down the street. We want to be in steps of where those neighborhoods and where those gun violence is happening. We want to thank, we've had some really great success with this past session. With the help of Adam Knapp and his leadership and his team at the Baton Rouge Area Chamber, we passed a handful of bills. Hiller, Sid, Murphy, hand in hand, came to the Capitol, got the DAs and the sheriffs across the state to pass bills that they've been trying to pass for decades, or years at least. Paula Davis, Act 374, She was a champion and authored a bill, and it brought oversight and accountability into the system of offender monitoring. What does that mean? It closes the gap and shares data for law enforcement and the judiciary so they can really figure out how to monitor these ankle monitors that are going around. We've seen in stories, it runs out of battery, or they take it off, and he commits another crime. He or she commit another crime. These are going to set some regulations, and this is because of a law that we passed. So thank you to Representative Davis. Representative Vanessa LaFleur, Act 229. Again, with our entire Baton Rouge delegation, we added 2 additional commissioners to the 19th JDC. Those 2 new judges are going to help us enhance our pretrial services and have speedier processing cases, or speedier case processing. So we've had some successes. There's a lot more to do, a lot more info from the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, a lot more energy from the Baton Rouge Area Chamber, a lot more leadership from Clay Young. But I'll challenge you this, and we'll end with this. Not enough has been done. And so with that, I'll let Clay kind of talk about some of our pillars and what we have next.
And it's Acura, Infiniti, and Subaru, just so you know. How y'all doing? So, you know, this is an all-hands-on-deck kind of situation. We all care about our community, and we want to see it be as good as it can be. The 3 pillars of Safe BR that you see on the screen deal with community, law enforcement, and accountability and transparency. And that's just not about elected leadership. That's about all of us who live and work here, who are raising families here. We all have to have our hands on a shovel, digging to clear a path so that we could leave something behind us greater than what we found. The Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Foundation, as Neil mentioned, was started about 3 years ago, and it encompasses membership with all law enforcement in the parish, the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office, Baton Rouge Police, Louisiana State Police. We tolerate Hiller every now and again, the Baton Rouge Area Chamber, the EBR school systems, Boys and Girls Clubs, Boy Scouts, George Bell, the great George Bell sits on our board, and a host of other community leaders. And it is our intention to not only support law enforcement, but to address the symptoms that create crime. Lack of access to resources, issues with education, broken homes, drugs, addictions. And we take the approach that public safety is not just about handcuffs and prison cells. It's about adjusting in these kids. For the very longest time, when people would hear about programs that addressed kids who lived in disinvested communities, there was always this sour connotation that went along with that. People saw them as handouts, that it wasn't going to work. And now in 2023, we realize how bass-ackwards that thinking was. And now we understand that without the investment on the front end, you will suffer from the results on the back end. When children are in homes and they don't have access to opportunity because they're not educated, or because of addiction in the home, or if they don't trust the government enough to take advantage of resources, that creates crime. Those children don't ask to come here. They deserve every opportunity to succeed. So for me, I'm very pro-law enforcement. But the problem should be addressed a hell of a lot earlier than when they get to law enforcement. Do y'all agree with that? Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. The Inspiration Center as a concept was actually born out of a conversation I had with Bernadine Mabry at the city parish. The Department of Human Services had a program that was offering a service, I can't remember at the time, to the community. They had the talent and they had the treasure to fund the resource to the community, but they couldn't get the people out. Like, they were there, the services were, they couldn't get them out. And I'm thinking, you know, what would happen if we had a space somewhere where families and kids would want to be there, and if you can get them there, you can get them the wraparound services. Something kids want. And in most cases, when the young men are going to football in communities of color, it's mama or grandmama taking them and picking them up because they are the often heads of households. So I pitched it to my board. They loved the concept. All I had was the umbrella. And then having a conversation with Angel Nelson, wave here, who's with Boys and Girls Clubs, and talking to Colonel Davis at State Police, we said, look, there's something like this happening around the country. So I'm in Orlando at a conference, and I hear about this facility in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And so came back, Colonel Davis was at that same conference, came back, told the board about it. We did our board meeting. We move around our monthly board meetings. We did the board meeting at Southern. We're outside talking about it. Colonel is fired up about it. We find out that there is something similar in Atlanta, Georgia. So we take a week. This is a volunteer board. Everybody has a responsibility. We get on a plane Monday and fly to St. Cloud, Minnesota. I struggle every time not to say St. Paul. St. Cloud, Minnesota, which none of y'all have heard of. And then the next day we flew to Atlanta. In St. Cloud, they have something called the Cop House, Community Outpost. The community and the law enforcement agency there work together. After school programming, they feed the kids. They interact with them athletically. There's mentorship. It's phenomenal. Boys and Girls Clubs, they're in the building in little old St. Cloud, Minnesota. So then we leave the next day and we fly to Atlanta. And we see this facility called the At Promise Center. I love this, y'all. It's the at symbol and promise. Didn't know what the hell that meant, just thought it was cool. But the story behind it is their goal to take kids from at risk to at promise. And the only thing about that I regret is that I didn't come up with that before them. So they do an intake on every kid. They find out if they're in school. They find out if there are any addiction or mental health issues. They build a jacket on the kid to find out what services he or her need to help them become productive members of our society. They have organizations that pay rent to be in the building. So we brought that concept back to Baton Rouge. And that is a rendering of a structure that will stand at Howell Park. Over 100 acres in the center of our city where Breck is redeveloping right now. There's a gorgeous structure out there right now that's almost done. And this building will stand next to it. The Inspiration Center will encompass services and service providers like Boys and Girls Clubs, local youth and family service agencies and organizations, our school system, law enforcement, athletics, mentorship, and community outreach groups. We also are pretty big on data. Pretty big company we can't name right now that's already guaranteed that once that structure stands, they will run all of our data for us. The Inspiration Center will house, get this, the Boys and Girls Clubs of Louisiana, indoor basketball, computer labs, the Allie Rice Learning Center, and the Devin Page Jr. Computer Lab, a video game arena, recording studio, meeting spaces, a cafeteria, a washer and dryer. We learned in Atlanta and in St. Cloud, some of these kids go home and have no way to wash their uniforms. Like they can take a bath, but they don't have anywhere to clean their clothes. This leads to self-esteem issues, which can work its way out in violent tendencies. It's getting the data to understand what triggers a young man at 8:30 in the morning to want to have a fist fight. What's the cause? I was in Dallas one time meeting with an organization that serves with kids, and they go in and support teachers, and he told two stories. I'll just tell you one of them. It's one kid who was in the classroom, and he was just acting a fool, and he was acting like he was trying to get kicked out of the classroom, and he was. He told the support staff, hey man, when I got home yesterday, somebody I didn't know was there with my mom. And when I left this morning, they were screaming at each other. I need to go check on my mom. It's so nuanced. And if there are people with knowledge far greater than I, if they're not in the situation addressing the problem, something that could be addressed with a trained clinician or someone who knows what they're doing could keep a kid from interacting with law enforcement. And it doesn't matter where you live, because you could be at a gas station on Bluebonnet, as we've seen, or sitting outside of J. Alexander's and gunfire rings out. We have to care. We have to care. So, in addition to the washer and dryer, there will be what we're calling the Leo room in the building. The name of the room is going to be the Glendale Hutto Jr. Law Enforcement Room. Glenn Hutto was killed about a block and a half away from where the Inspiration Center will stand. This was a couple years ago on a Sunday, Lieutenant McNeely. He was out there with, he and one of his fellow officers were shot out there, and we're going to name that room after him. The community that will house and host the Inspiration Center is a combination of people who are in poverty and those who are teetering in what George Bell often calls the Alice population. If you have not done research on Alice, I recommend you do some digging on the Alice population. It is asset limited, income constrained, and employed. These are people who work every day and who are one blown out AC away from either being on the streets or having to sacrifice some service for their families. I'm only saying this to you because I need you guys to understand that there is so much bluster about public safety, and it always starts and stops at what's the chief doing? What's the sheriff doing? What's the DA doing? What's the mayor doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Didn't come here to be liked, so don't care if you don't. Now, let's talk about what this will cost. $13 million is our overall budget for the Inspiration Center. $11 million for the facility, $2 million for the expansion into smaller areas or smaller facilities. The two areas we're looking at, Gardier and Scotlandville. Got to get services to the people. $7.2 million is our number. We carved it down from $8 million. That's the building before furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So how are we going to pay for this? I'm so glad you asked that question. To date, we have identified commitments to the total amount of $7,375,000 today. Our current partners, the state of Louisiana, East Baton Rouge Parish, the Boys and Girls Clubs of Louisiana, BREC, DentaQuest, Exxon, the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, and two other partners that I can't name here because we are working through some agreements with them, but once we've gotten to the other side of that, that will be an additional $2.5 million. And one of them is a national partner that's trying to come to Baton Rouge. We intend to begin executing contracts in the coming weeks, and this is going to be one special press conference. That's all I can tell you. We're going to introduce the team, and it's going to be historic for Baton Rouge. So the purpose of the Inspiration Center is not to be a panacea. It's not a magic wand. As I've told people who have programs that impact youth, we're not trying to copy your program. You have a football team. We're building you a stadium. Do your thing. And we've seen lowered recidivism rates, lower truancy rates, better access to service, better police-community relations. It's all in the data that we saw in those cities. I just learned that there's one in Knoxville that we have to go see as well. So we'll take questions on this, but then I want to transition quickly to Paige Rice. The Paige Rice Camera Initiative started after a meeting that we had with Davis Rohr, the late Davis Rohr, who approached us about assisting with the replacement of cameras in downtown Baton Rouge. So the Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Foundation, in association with the Baton Rouge Area Chamber and some businesses there, raised about $100,000 to replace the existing cameras and add a couple of additional cameras to downtown Baton Rouge. And so we scheduled a press conference, and I knew I could already hear it before we get there. People were going to be thinking, why is everything in downtown Baton Rouge? Well, we intended to announce then that we were expanding the program, and we've done so across the parish in partnership with the city police and the sheriff's office. We've also, as many of you know, gotten a commitment from Visit Baton Rouge. They committed $150,000 to fund cameras at their hotels. Exxon committed $75,000 to the program to put 4 cameras at their facility, 6 that will be placed in 70805 at the instruction of law enforcement. We've also engaged 33 strategies who are going to be managing the back of the house, as we call it, of the Paige Rice Camera Initiative. We're redesigning the online portal, and then next month we're going to announce the first of 2 evolutions of the Paige Rice Camera Initiative. Now take a step back and then 2 forward. Neil mentioned it earlier. This initiative is named after a 3-year-old who was lying in a bed next to his sister, who caught a round in the head, and an LSU student on her way home, minding her own business. Those families have gotten together, gotten to know, I knew one of them, one of the families well, have gotten to know Paul Rice very, very well. They're proud to be a part of this. So next month, we have another iteration of what this will look like. Would y'all like to know what that's going to be? Want me to tell y'all? Well, there are cameras here, you know. The media is here. So we're going to include license plate readers next month. It is our intention to have our foundation buy the first one, and then we're going to raise money for 9 more. If you're in the room and you're so inclined, we take check, cash app. Cash, if you have a big enough bag, we'll take that with you. But here's the point, and I'll just say this again before we get into the call to action. I really think we have to change the way, in my own opinion, just one man, and how we dialogue public safety. Many of you don't have the time to go walk in communities as so many of us have. Many of you may not have the big dollars to donate $100,000 to a cause, but there is something you can give. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. And I think at the end of the day for us, we have to own this as a city. Now, Neil talked about not black, not white, but make no mistake about it, we still have to deal with that issue too. We still have to deal with that issue too, because there are too many young men who are laser-guided missiles, and what their laser is pointing at is destruction. Theirs first. I care about them, just like I would care about any of your kids, because I paid for my flight to Atlanta. Angel got us a private jet deal to Minnesota, which we can talk about when I'm not in front of this mic. But I put the time in because it matters to me. And you can't say, no, I'm busy. I'm busy too. Again, some people are loud about what's going on, but never lend a hand to fix it. And if that's your position, I'm fine. Stake that ground. I just don't respect you. This is how you can get involved with the initiative. If you are so inclined, do so. Support the efforts. Thank you.
Got a couple questions, if anyone has any. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have the current statistics on every dollar invested in education, what it saves later in incarceration?
In East Baton Rouge Parish? I think we're working on that. And I'm gonna ask Chris if he wants to talk about that right now, or if it's gonna be something that they put out in, it'll be in a couple weeks. The foundation's putting together a good report on some of those statistics. Yes, sir?
Years ago, and Hiller, I give him credit for this, we had the BRAVE initiative.
Yes, sir.
We learned a lot of things there. How has any of that translated into this wonderful effort you guys have described today?
Brave Initiative is something certainly we want to continue to fund. We want to make sure that it stays live. We want to bring it back. It's a matter of funding. And so, Clay,
Some of the tenets of what Brave did worked. Brave has a bad connotation in the areas where people are served. So you can do some of the things, you just got to call it something else.
I think Scott had one.
You mentioned resources. Could you kind of define that for us, what that means?
The question is from Scott, resources and for law enforcement, what does that mean? Resources to law enforcement, you know, another idea, and if you look at our 3 pillars of what we want to do and accomplish, is to support our law enforcement officers. Again, it's not the only thing. We want to make sure that they're the highest paid individuals in the state of Louisiana. There's no reason they can't be. We're the capital city. We have a huge population. We invest a lot in other things. We should go and invest in our own public safety. And so working to make sure that they get adequate resources, the technology, the cameras, the license plate readers, the Brave, the truancy efforts with the school board, and then also the frontline folks that are out there every day, making sure that they get paid the most than any officer and deputy in the state of Louisiana. There you go. Well, thank you all for your time.